Well, I think we will get started. Welcome. My name is Jennifer Adams, and I'm the editor-in-chief with Signature Leadership at Knowledge Hook, and thrilled to be with you here today. We have a great session and a couple of wonderful panelists lined up to talk about the OECD survey of social and emotional skills. And some of you who've been following along with us each month will know that this is part of a three-part series. We did one session a month ago, and it was on the findings on inclusion. And today we're going to be talking about gender. And a month from now, we will be talking about another one of the areas of findings. So thrilled to have you here today. And I will introduce to you our partner organizations. Three of us got together and decided at the pandemic that we needed to support the educational leaders around the world, and particularly in the area of social emotional learning. And our first partner is Knowledge Hook. It's a Canadian digital math company. And if you tune into knowledgehook.com/leadership, you're welcome to access any of the on-demand video recordings of sessions that we have done in the past. So please join us there. Our second partner is Karanga, and Karanga is a global alliance for social and emotional learning and life skills. And we are very excited to say that it is truly global. We have over 100 steering committee members that are in organizations and education systems from right around the world. Thrilled to be working with them. And finally, our third partner is Salzburg Global Seminar. And Salzburg Global Seminar is an international not-for-profit that emerged at the end of the Second World War. And very happy to be working with them, who really focus on helping to develop current and future leaders. Before we dive in today, first of all, welcome to all the women that are going to be with us today. It is International Women's Day, and particularly today we are thinking of the mothers and the daughters and the sisters and the grandmothers of the people of the Ukraine. And so our thoughts are with them. And what better time to be talking about social emotional learning and trying to make the world a better place. Really happy to say that we've got a really nice representation. We've got registrants from 6 Canadian provinces and territories, from 13 states across the US, and from 24 countries. Of course, the OECD survey on social emotional skills was an international survey, and we've got lots of representatives from different countries here with us. So I'm going to introduce this to our wonderful panelists. The first is an amazing colleague of mine who often facilitates these sessions, Dominic Regester. He is program director at Salzburg Global Seminar, one of our partners, and he is also an executive committee member with Karanga. Santiago Isaza Arango is someone that I had the opportunity to meet about, probably 6 or 7 years ago, Santiago. And Santiago is a representative of his country and was one of the participating countries, and he's with Fundación Luker out of Colombia. Santiago, welcome.
Hi,
and finally, we have Erin Baumgartner. And I had the privilege of working with one of Erin's colleagues out of Houston. And of course, Houston was the city out of the US that was participating. Erin, thank you so much. I know that you're with the Houston Education Research Consortium, and will be able to show us and share with us all sorts of great things that you're doing with this research and other research in the area of social emotional learning. So welcome to the three of you, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dominic, to get started. Please, with the people that are on live with us, please jump into the chat, introduce yourselves, tell us where you're coming from, and don't hesitate to ask questions and make comments. We love to have a really interactive session here, so welcome. Dominic, over to you.
Thank you, Jen. Welcome everyone to this Social and Emotional Learning Leadership Series event on International Women's Day. We're really excited to have the chance to share this hour with you. This month, we're putting this program on during Karanga's Social and Emotional Learning Week. Karanga's organizing a whole raft of different free online activities at different points during the week. I've just put the link in the chat there if you're interested in finding out about other events. And obviously, if you're in the US, then this week culminates in SEL Day. And SEL for USA have coordinated a fantastic range of different programs across almost every state in the US, I think, and I'll share the link for their website. after I finish presenting. So I'm going to give a really brief introduction to the OECD report. The report came out last autumn, and the report presents the first results from the OECD survey of social and emotional skills. It really sheds fascinating light on the different ways in which social and emotional skills differ by gender, which is particularly important for our conversation today, but also by social background, by age, and how much they matter for student outcomes, such as academic performance and well-being. 10 different cities took part. It was a good global spread. And as Jen said, we've been organizing this series of city dialogues. So last month we had really interesting conversation between Sintra and Helsinki, thinking about inclusion. This month, fantastic to be focusing on Manizales and Houston. The report was organized around 5 chapters. So there's a chapter focusing on age, gender, and social background. There's then a chapter which really dives down into the implications for social emotional skills and academic success. The 3rd chapter focused on well-being. The 4th chapter on the relationship between creativity and curiosity and social and emotional skills. And then the 5th chapter focuses on social relations. And the way the report is structured, there are really interesting sections on implications for policymakers, for school leaders, for superintendents. It's a free PDF to access through the OECD site. We'll share the link to the OECD site shortly in the chat. So there is some really interesting and striking pieces of gender analysis throughout the report. The first thing to highlight, though, is not gender specific and should be a cause for concern for everyone who's interested in education outcomes, is that across all of the cities, all 15-year-old students, irrespective of gender or social background, report lower social and emotional skills on average than their 10-year-old counterparts. So there is a really significant decline between the ages of 10 and 15 in terms of self-reported social and emotional skills. And this decline is much more significant for girls than it is for boys. Now, this is really important because at Karanga, at Knowledge Hub, at Salzburg Global, and I imagine for almost everyone else joining this call, we recognize the importance of social and emotional skills for a really wide variety of life chances, life goals. So crucial for employability, crucial for well-being, crucial for navigating increasingly complex societies. So it is really important to drill down into the data and try and understand why this drop-off happens. What is it that happens between 10 and 15 that means all students are self-reporting lower levels of social and emotional skills? And as I said, the tail-off is particularly pronounced for girls. That said, girls report higher levels of skills for certain task areas. So tasks that relate to things like responsibility or achievement motivation. Girls also across the 10 cities were reporting higher levels of skills that were important in an interconnected world. So for skills like empathy, cooperation, and tolerance. By contrast, boys have higher, according to the self-report, boys have higher emotional regulation skills like stress resistance, optimism, and emotional control, as well as certain social skills like assertiveness and energy. And these findings were true across all 10 cities, although as we get into the conversations with Houston and Manizales, we'll be able to dig down a little deeper into that. So really interesting implications. I think this was something that came up in the last session as well, but the implications of the OECD study are going to take a long time to unpick, and the way in which they may translate into policy shifts or change in practice will take time to seep through. I'm really looking forward to the chance today to talk to Erin and Santiago and find out a bit more about how this is playing out in Houston and Manizales. So the structure for the session will be, I'm going to hand over to Erin in a moment, and she's going to present for 5-10 minutes or thereabouts with general findings from Houston and then a bit more in-depth gender analysis. There'll then be the chance for Santiago and I to ask us some questions, and we'll bring in as many questions as we can from the chat, and then we'll pivot to Manizales and follow the same structure we'll pivot to Santiago, excuse me, and follow the same structure for Manizales. So with that said, it gives me enormous pleasure to hand the stage over to Erin Baumgartner. Thanks, Erin.
Hi, thank you for joining us today. Thanks for inviting Houston to join the conversation today. This is such an important conversation that we're having, and it's important that we keep it going, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the study in just a second, but the study happened in 2019 and we're still having the conversations today. So I think this event is just another indication that this is the time to be having these conversations, and we need to keep doing it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Houston context for this study, talk about some of the findings in Houston, and then a little bit about how our local school district uses findings like this to make decisions and improve opportunities for students. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about what our organization is. So the Houston Education Research Consortium, we are a research center at Rice University in Houston, Texas. And we work in partnership with area school districts to ensure that the research we're doing doesn't just sit on a shelf somewhere. So often academics are doing research based on the topics that they care about and that they think are important for the people that they're doing research on to know about. But really, we truly believe this is a partnership between HERC, or the Houston Education Research Consortium, and our school district partners. We work with 11 different partners that are in the Houston area, but the partner that we focus on for the purpose of this study is the Houston Independent School District. And so the Houston Independent School District, or you might see the acronym HISD, is one of the largest school districts in the US. It tends to be between the 7th or 8th largest in the US, depending on who's counting, I think. And so in a given year, the school district has around 200 to 215,000 students, the largest district in the state of Texas. The demographic composition of the district is very unique in that it's approximately 60% Hispanic or Latino. Around 30 to 40% of students are not English proficient, and so they have strengths and proficiency in other language, and they're still working on building their English language skills. And the district is around 75% economically disadvantaged. And so the work that we've done on this project has been in direct collaboration with the director of the Social and Emotional Learning Department. This study with the OECD is so important because it aligns with the district's vision for ensuring that the social and emotional learning supports and needs of students are coordinated, and that the district can grow culturally responsive practices and emotionally safe learning environments for students in the district. And so when OECD approached Houston about participating in this, it just made so much sense given all of the initiatives in place in the district right now. So to talk a little bit about what the study context looked like in the Houston area. So the study happened in the fall of 2019, which means it was pre-pandemic. So the way that we think about a lot of the work here is, it is so important because it gives us a snapshot of what student experience looked like before the pandemic. These conversations are only more important now, given the significant change in experience that students had over the last two years now. We're really looking at almost exactly 2 years from when we had to shift gears in the US. And so having this understanding of what the baseline student experience, skills, needs were at that time helps the district think about moving forward and how to make sure they're serving what skills and needs the students have now. So in Houston, we had around 6,400 students who participated over almost 120 campuses. For the 10-year-old cohort, so there were two cohorts of students that participated. The younger cohort were 10 years old, and this represented around 3,300 students from 74 schools. And the older cohort were 15-year-olds who were represented around 3,100 students at 45 schools. So I'm going to give you a very high-level overview of some of the findings, but I'll have some links at the end. And as Dominic mentioned, he'll be sharing some links with you all. So if you're interested in diving even more into some of these findings, please do so. I will also say that the information that I'm going to share today are about the student reported skills. So students, parents, and teachers were all asked to report on student social and emotional skills. But for today, we're going to focus on students' self-reflection of their own skills. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to read this figure first, because there's a lot going on. And that's why I'll encourage you, if you're really interested, to dive in deeper, to download the actual report. This is from the OECD's report about what the Houston context looked like. And so if we look at that line across the middle of the screen, that represents the 0. And so for any skills that we see outlined across the bottom where girls report higher skills, the bars would be above the line. And for any skills where boys would report higher scores than girls, we would see the bars falling below the line. And so across the board for 10-year-olds, I think that there are 2 important things to take away. One is that for most skills, girls were more likely to report higher levels of these skills. So we see for so many of the bars that the bars are above that center line. So girls are reporting higher skills in responsibility, in empathy, in cooperation, in tolerance. One of the other thing that I think is important to take away is that I'm focusing on the gray bars. That's the Houston context. The orange bars here are what the international average looked like. And so the second thing that I think is important to take away is Houston looks a lot like the rest of the world when we think about where both female and male self-reported social and emotional skills are. So there's similarities. We don't see places where the orange bar is one direction and the gray bar is the other direction. There might be a little difference between the bars, but really they're all kind of showing the same sort of pattern. When we think about 15-year-olds, we see a little bit more of a mixed story happening. Whereas for the 10-year-olds, the girls tended to report higher skills across the board. For 15-year-olds, we see that there's a more of a mixed picture. There are some skills where girls report higher, some skills that boys report higher. So that's one of the takeaways from this graph. The second takeaway for us from this graph is that the difference between groups is more pronounced. So I'm going to show you a figure in a second that lets us compare these side by side. But we really see these are bigger bars. They're longer bars, which means it's a bigger difference between boys and girls on the different skills. And we see that with more so with 15-year-olds than with 10-year-olds. So I separated them out because trying to look at these all together is a little difficult, but I put them side by side so we can see the patterns and what the takeaways are. So again, for 10-year-old girls, they tend to report higher levels across skills, but for 15-year-old girls, there are more mixed differences between the skills that girls and boys are reporting as strength points for them. But also, I made the point that the bars are bigger on the 15-year-old side, which means the difference between boys and girls is getting bigger as they age. So what, the whole purpose of a research organization like HERC is we want to make sure that we are doing research that gets used. And so to do that, we have to work with the district to think about how is this information helpful to them. So we shared the information from the OECD report, and we did some analyses of our own, which showed very similar patterns, especially when we're talking about the topics related to gender and where gender differences exist. But in thinking about how a school district has and can use information like this, one of the first things the district recognizes is that this is an opportunity to provide targeted support. So the district can think about whether there are particular regions of the district where it seems like students could use extra support with certain skills, or whether there are certain populations in the district that can use particular support. So that's one of the ways districts can use these types of data. The other is that it helps provide support, I said, for programs already in motion, because our district partner, they recognize and they observe student experiences every single day. And so a lot of the decisions that they make about the programs they offer are because of these observations they have. But what this study has allowed for is to quantify those observations that the district has had. And so they can use information like this to support some of the decisions that they've made based on their own observations in students' day-to-day lives. The other thing a study like this does is elevates the conversation around student social and emotional skills within the district and within our city more broadly. In the US, school districts have a lot of independence in terms of how they operate and how they make decisions. And so when HERC was able to share these findings out with HISD and with our community partners more broadly, it starts changing the conversation around what students need. And it's not only about academic tutoring, but it's about recognizing the needs for social and emotional supports and school counselors and social workers and what the Houston School District calls wraparound services. So when we're thinking about housing and food and clothing and all of the other needs that students have, helping have this conversation around social and emotional skills is just another way of thinking of all of the mental health and supports that students need. And then finally, I shouldn't say finally, but this is the final example that I'll share in the Houston context, is that this study created opportunities for more conversations to be happening within the school district. So often departments are very siloed. And as even an example in the Houston School District, social and emotional learning is one department, and the counseling is in another department, and wraparound services is in another department. And so when we share information like this, these departments can start having conversations together about how they're going to jointly support the needs that students have. But it's also beyond just thinking about those units and thinking about how departments like teacher development and training and principal development and training can learn about the needs that students have in the district and how their campuses can support those skills. And also provides opportunities for the district to partner with external partners who may provide additional, especially mental health related supports that the district can't always have in-house. This helps give, data like this helps give the district a better sense of the scope of what the need is and where the need exists. And so I know that was a quick, fast overview of what things look like in Houston. And again, I think that we'll probably hear some similar things from Santiago, but I just want to thank you and say I appreciate the opportunity to keep this conversation going. If you're interested in any of the work HERC has done specifically around these OECD data, our website is listed there. And as Dominic mentioned, the OECD website more broadly has the bigger reports around every single country and the big international report that encompasses all of that.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Erin. Can I jump straight in with a question which has come up in the chat?
Sure.
Which is, and I, recognizing that you weren't directly involved in the study, but do you know how the research accounted for identities that are outside of gender binary?
I can't remember if, and maybe Santiago knows the answer to this, we can see if he jumps in. I don't know if they've asked, because this was self-reported by students. And so I can't remember if they gave them more opportunities than male and female for response, but I can look and let you know.
Great. Jen, you're muted, Jen, sorry.
Yes, sorry. I think actually the student information was downloaded from the student
from the school
information
district
systems.
That's
so
right.
whatever was in the student information system in the different countries, that's right. how it would come up. So if systems allowed for identification outside of gender binary, then that information would have been fed in that way.
That's right. Thank you. See, this was fall of 2019, my brain.
Erin, I had a little bit of a head start because I was thinking and I had no idea. And then I thought, yes, now I remember right. It was student information. So I had a head start on you being able to think about it.
It's that pre-pandemic brain, isn't it? It's like a different person. But yeah, Deb, thank you very much for the question there. I also, it's worth saying, I think that OECD is starting to recruit cities for the second phase of the study. And I think that they are looking, at having a broader spectrum of gender identities for students in that. So going back to Houston, if that's okay, Erin, were there any surprises in the report? Were there things that really stood out for you, or that kind of wrong-footed district leaders?
I think one of the things that we heard time and time again were, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, that's exactly what we expected to see. And as I mentioned, I think it was, the district uses a lot of observational, anecdotal, their experiences with students and on campuses to be making decisions. But these data provide a way for them to say, it's not just what we think we're seeing. This is actually happening from a student perspective too, right? So I'm curious, and one of the things that we're going to be doing coming up in the next few months here at HERC is thinking about how teacher ratings and student ratings vary in terms of these skills, and why and for whom that might be the case, because you can imagine that there is going to be some variation in how that happens.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things that you had mentioned earlier that I don't think we quite saw it the same way, that not necessarily that girls had lower social and emotional skills for the older cohort, but just that the difference between males and females was smaller. I think that's maybe part of the way that we thought about it a little bit differently than girls just having lower skills.
Right. Santiago, you're welcome to jump in if you have questions from that you'd like to bring to her, and otherwise we'll carry on with questions coming up in the chat.
No, I don't have questions for Erin in this moment.
So I'm also really interested, and this is a question, specifically, I think, in the US context at the moment, that there's more and more coverage about opposition to social and emotional learning. And this seems to be gaining momentum from a variety of different perspectives or sort of different drivers behind that. Rhonda has asked a great question in the chat, which is about some of the pushback on SEL is coming specifically from an equity perspective, and the risk of the sort of argument that SEL plays into a kind of conformist approach to a colonial system of education. And have you encountered much opposition in Houston to the school district being involved into the study? And was this a factor in how the analysis has been presented?
I think the school district themselves are very interested in understanding student social and emotional skills and thinking about strategies for helping students develop the skills that are appropriate for them. I think one of the important things that I've observed in our partnership with the school district is they recognize that student learning is not one size fits all, that students have unique experiences, have unique needs. And so they do a lot of more targeted targeted resources to be providing support to students who need it in the way that they need it and the type of support that they need. So, it's not that we're teaching every student to have this exact same understanding of what cooperation is, but recognizing that there are different opportunities for helping develop that skill set. The other thing that I think is important is that SEL can't be treated as something separate from a daily educational experience for students, that there are opportunities for providing teachers supports for helping embed social and emotional learning opportunities within a daily classroom environment, so that it's not you learn math and then you learn social and emotional skills. It's that we figure out how to put these things together, because one is not going to work without the other.
And just kind of sticking with, I suppose, some of the critique around SEL, a question that Cynthia Coons has brought up in the chat is around how important it is for SEL frameworks to be culturally specific or culturally contextualized. And the US, I think in particular because of work of organizations like CASEL and Second Step, has developed a lot of frameworks that have then been adopted and used in very different contexts. So it is really striking how consistent the findings across the 10 cities were, and would love to get your kind of thoughts on that, and whether that in itself was surprising to you. Like, you think contextually Houston and Suzhou have very different education systems, and yet the data shows a very similar SEL context.
And I think, one of the things to think about for when we're talking about the comparison with the international context, we're talking about on average. So there were, I think, 11 countries that participated. And so we're talking about on average. So maybe there are some cities that are very different from each other in terms of what the student experiences are and what the student needs are and how students are self-reporting their own skills in these different areas. But when we think about the average, that's where we see things that are a little closer. You know, one of the reasons why we probably see some similarities across place is that this is the second phase of the study. The first phase of this study was a pilot to sort of test these concepts and see, does empathy in one place look like empathy in another place? For people who are less familiar with the study, you know, we're not using one factor, one question to talk about what empathy is. There's a series of questions. It might be 4 or 5 questions that students were asked to create sort of a scale around what empathy means. And so there was a lot of work done by the OECD before we even came to a place where with the results that I'm sharing today that helped get to a place so that we have a relatively common understanding of some of these skills. One of the things that is that we're doing within the US context is at HERC, we are doing some research that goes beyond the study that the OECD put out, recognizing that the need of our district partners is more than the OECD, only the OECD report. The OECD provides report provides a great amount of baseline information, but the district is trying to understand what are the circumstances in which students are having different levels of these skills. How is the match between parent and teacher and student report? Where does that occur? Where is that mismatch? How can we provide more support to whoever it needs to be to have more alignment in our understanding of student skills? And so I think we're doing some more locally specific things to understand some of these patterns where hopefully we have a better understanding moving forward of what ways these sorts of data can be culturally responsive and locally specific.
Thank you. Santiago, do you want to...
I was wondering, Erin, if maybe in your city in Houston, did you have some findings around the differences in the social and economic context of the students here in our city? We found a lot of differences in the performance of the students around the different contexts. Better social context of the students were getting better performance in the social emotional skills. I was wondering if you have the same phenomenon.
Yeah, we did see, so, you know, I focused on gender today because of the focus of today's conversation, but we did see variation in a number of other areas too. So when we looked at economic differences, we did see that students from different economic backgrounds did have lower or higher skills in some areas. There was a significant amount of variation there. We also see some variation by student performance. So some students who perform different academically are higher on some of these skills than students who don't perform as high academically. So I think that there are lots of pieces and components that go to how understanding what these skills mean and what they're reflecting. Are they reflecting some demographic characteristics, or is that helping us know that certain populations might need different support in different areas to help develop skills? If we know that, for example, persistence, I think one of the things we learned in the US is persistence is very connected to a student performance, which is probably not too surprising, but there are certain populations who are performing less strongly on or self-reporting lower skills on persistence. So what can we do to help students build some of those skills so that that's not the thing that's contributing to what difference students are experiencing? We also saw differences, I'll just say quickly, some minor differences by language. So students who are proficient in English versus not proficient in English, and then some differences by race and ethnicity. So students from different racial and ethnic backgrounds have higher or lower levels of these skills. And it's not uniform across the board. It's not that one race or ethnicity is high on everything, or one race or ethnicity is low on everything. There's really variation that exists.
One of the things, Dominic, just back to the question that you asked about and someone else asked about the intercultural aspect of SEL. Erin talked about the test phase when they were doing the item testing and seeing how they were working. And Santiago, you probably remember that meeting that we attended where the staff came back, the OECD staff came back, and they had done their initial analysis, and they were thrilled because they were very worried about being able to develop a study that actually would work across cultures and very different education systems. And what they found was that the items actually worked. And it was really, you know, there were statements that were made that this was truly kind of one of the first intercultural assessments, large scale assessments of social emotional learning. So we're pleased with that.
That's right.
I'd love to ask two more quick questions, Erin, to you, and then Santiago will come to your presentation if that's okay. So one question, sort of outside of the parameters of the study, but around SEL practice in the schools and the school district. This kind of connects with the question that Robert Baines and Deb have both put up in the chat. That you know, have your schools developed specific approaches for weaving SEL into multiple subjects in the curriculum? Does SEL development have more of a place in certain subjects, or is it a standalone topic?
I think, well, so I'm not at the school district, so I'm going to speak about my observations of this, both the school district and what I see kind of more broadly in the US too, is that often the SEL department is a standalone department. It's not necessarily embedded in the curriculum department. And so in order for districts and the education system at large to be doing a better job of integrating these things into the curriculum, I think that it takes very intentional effort by school districts to be having these cross-departmental collaborations and developing these opportunities. But then also, I think, as I mentioned before, providing teachers an understanding of what it means to help students develop skills around responsibility or persistence or cooperation, so that when they're building their own classroom and what their day-to-day looks like and how their classroom is going to function, they can build that in. I think, you know, one of the things that Robert asked is how does that happen in the classroom? How can you build SEL? You know, if you think about cooperation as an example, maybe there are times when students work together on projects versus working independently. Maybe that helps them build some of those skills. Maybe that helps them build the emotion control skills because they have to, you know, sit with their peers and be responsive in a different way. They're working in this collaborative environment. They have to build some level of trust with their peers. And so when we think about all of these skills that we're talking about, student social emotional skills, there's really a whole range. You can think of a lot of ways that on a daily basis, there are opportunities to embed that into how students are learning.
And are they then assessed, you know, in that way, so that, you know, there's a kind of intentionality around building a cooperation activity into different subjects, and then
yeah, I think one of the challenges that the Houston district has said is that before this study, they didn't really have a very broad way to think about measuring student social and emotional skills. That wasn't something that was happening and being captured. And, you know, the sentiment behind the director of the department, Dr. Roberta Scott, who is a great partner for us throughout this, is really that this is so important because it gives them a baseline and it gives them a starting point. So they can think about when they ask these questions again, they can see where and whether change has happened. And so I think this is a starting point. But also being sensitive to the fact that we don't want to give kids more tests. And so figuring out how to make that balance. I think that's one of the areas where we hear a lot of pushback is we don't need another assessment for students. They're already getting tested too much. So thinking about ways that it can get better embedded, asking these questions, measuring these things can get better embedded, I think is important for us to keep thinking about as we move forward. I don't think we have the answer yet.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Erin. You fielded questions on a wide range of different topics relating to the study and beyond. So I'd love to bring Santiago in now to share some of the findings from Manizales. And then, Erin, if you have questions for Santiago, we can follow the same format. And then at the very end, maybe the four of us with Jen can have a conversation about potential policy shifts growing out of the findings. But Santiago, over to you. And thank you so much for doing this.
Okay, so hi to everyone. I'm very happy to be here in this panel. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for inviting us, and thank you, Dominic, for being our moderator. as you invite us, we are going to share some of our findings in the gender findings in the social emotional survey that we made with the OECD. First of all, I want to have some context. I work in the Luker Foundation. It's a corporate foundation. It's a foundation that comes from a business company that is called Casa Luker. They produce chocolate and coffee. And our corporate foundation is a non-profit organization, and we have been working for more than 27 years in education and entrepreneurship. We are giving this focus to our work, and because we believe in social responsibility. Our foundation is located here in Colombia at the coffee region in a mid-sized city called Manizales. It's a 440,000 inhabitant city. We work through public and private partnerships, and we want to always strengthen the public schools. Here in our country, there's a big gap between private and public schools. So we are working to solve some equity problems that we have here in our country, and we are looking forward to have a better education for our students that have to access to public schools, are the most vulnerable students in our country. Our education approach is to work in social emotional learning. First of all, we believe that is one of the most important topics today in education, but we also work to foster basic skills, language and math in elementary schools mainly. We have a program that is called Let's All Learn to Read. It's a very important program, and also a program in mathematics. And third, we have a program to increase the access to higher education. It's called the University at Your School. And this program is changing the way to enter university. We are doing a program with the universities, getting the 2 years of college into the high school, to do it in parallel. And also we are starting to work in fostering global skills, so digital and bilingual skills. Here in our country, the English is not very good in English is not very good at schools. Just like the 11% of the students of public schools are getting a proper level of English. So we are fostering to have more bilingual teaching in our schools. This is a little bit also of context. Our country, and as all the Latin American countries, we are always in the below the average of the OECD, in the last places in the PISA cognitive test. This is the last 2018 test. And also what we see in this traditional PISA test is that Colombia, the students is always under the OECD average in all the areas that they measure, but we have been improving our performance since 2006. That is the first time that Colombia presented to this test. Also, in the traditional PISA test, we see some gender issues. We see that girls are performing better in language, but we have a less difference than the other countries. That's good, but the bad part is that boys are performing better in math and science, and we have the highest differences among the other countries. So in math and science, we have a really important problem to solve. That's why we also are working in fostering these basic skills of language and math mainly. What we are doing with social emotional learning is that we have a program that is called Active Urban School, and it's fostering the active pedagogies against traditional front education model. We want to promote in the schools active pedagogies like project-based learning, to change this traditional education model that we have in our country. And this model has a lot of activities that develop these social and emotional skills. Our model is being implemented in the 73% of the public schools. 21,000 students we have in our program, and it goes from kinder to 11th grade. That is our last grade. The program has emphasis on the teacher training and support in this active pedagogical model. And we also give textbooks for all the subjects, for the traditional subjects, but with all the curriculum has activities that promote this social and emotional learning. Our main focus on these skills has been in cooperation, in all the collaboration and cooperation among the students. Also emotional regulation, perseverance, that we believe that is one of the main skills to have also entrepreneurship. Self-control, that is so important in our country, a country that has a lot of conflict, in a political conflict, and also creativity, that we believe that is a very important skill that we have to promote. So this is our main approach. One general finding that we have in the study with the OECD is that our schools were performing better in 12 out of the 15 competences that we measure with the OECD, compared to the schools that don't have the model. So that's a very good news for our program. We see that it has been showing some results in most of the competences that we were measuring. And also another important general finding, not talking about gender yet, is that our city, Manizales, was the first city in average life satisfaction among the other cities. That happened in 10 years and also in 50 years. More satisfaction in the 10-year-olders than the 15 years. And this finding is very confusing, because we believe that our city is the city that has the bigger social and economic gaps among the other cities, but our students are very satisfied with their life conditions, and this is one thing that is putting us to think. Also, this is we see some similar results in a study, an international study of felicity, and so that's one thing to think. When we're talking about the gender findings, we see that in general the study shows big difference between 10 years olders and 15 years olders around gender, and these gender differences are bigger on the 15-year-olders. Manizales happens the same as Erin was saying. Our city is very similar to the behavior of the other cities in the gender differences, but where we have the greater differences, even greater than the other cities, where in responsibility and achievement motivation, seeing that the girls were performing much better than in the other countries than boys, and in emotional control, assertiveness, and energy, boys were performing better, and with a bigger differences than the other countries. That's we didn't know about this finding before the study. Is something that give us some material to getting deeper understanding of this situation. As Erin said, this study is like a baseline for us to start working and start thinking, because it's the first moment in which we measure the social and emotional learning. We also have some additional findings that we saw that Manizales is the city with the highest correlation between social and emotional skills and academic performance. that happened in all the cities, but Manizales was the one with the higher differences. That means that it's important for us to keep working in the cognitive skills and the basic skills. Also, we see that young people from Manizales were the most interested in accessing higher education among all the other cities. And we believe that this has to be related with the program that we have in the city that is called University at Your School. People are saying that it's possible to access university thanks to the program that we are promoting. The third point is that definitely socioeconomic advantage students are having better performance in the social emotional skills, as Erin confirmed us that Houston has the same behavior. But here in Manizales, we have huge differences, huge socioeconomic differences. So this is very sad. And that's why it's important to work also in the basic and academic skills, because if we improve these skills in the public schools, we can also have better social emotional skills performance, as the study was saying. We saw also that there's in Manizales a higher correlation between curiosity, assertiveness, tolerance towards the educational expectations. So if we believe that if we promote these competences of curiosity, assertiveness, tolerance, if students can have more educational expectations, and when we have students with higher educational expectations, for sure we will have better education in our city. And another finding that we saw in this study, and we have seen this finding in another study, is that bullying is affecting too much the performance of the students and the well-being of the students at school. We really think that bullying is one of the problems that we have to work, and it's not a gender finding, but for sure that it will help students, boys and girls, to have better well-being in the schools. So what we are taking as conclusion of this study is that it's very important for us to have more information about social emotional skills. We as I was telling, was our first experience measuring these skills, but we started our own study of socio-emotional skills. We made our own instruments to measure this kind of skills with the support of the World Bank. And with these instruments, we start measuring year by year the socio-emotional skills in students of elementary, middle, and high school of the public schools and the private schools in Manizales. So with this, with having with more information about these skills, will let us improve our interventions in our projects. What also we have found in this study is that we have to focus this socio-emotional learning on teachers, because we can't pretend that the students have the socio-emotional skills if their teachers don't have these skills. So we have to go and work with teachers also. And what we also need to do is, it's more important after the pandemic, is to work at the student level. We need to do more remediation and more recovery of not only social emotional skills, but also basic skills, to focus on the students being boys, girls, doesn't matter the gender issues, but if the students have been struggling with social emotional skills or basic skills, we have to have individual interventions and smaller group interventions to focus and to improve the performance of the students in different skills. So this is like my main reflection around this topic.
Thank you, Santiago. That was fantastic. I have one kind of quick obvious question, because your foundation is involved in delivering programs around social and emotional learning. Are there shifts in practice or approach that you've already started to think about because of the findings of the study, or are the schools in Manizales starting to think differently about some of their approaches based on findings?
Yeah, indeed, we have been working in this active schools program for more than 20 years, and now what we are designing this year is the active schools 2.0 program. We need a new approach based on these findings, and what we are doing is that we want to see and focus on main skills. We believe that the program is not a miracle to solve all the skills, and so we want to focus on the 3 or 5 more important skills, and work in and study these skills, how to promote these skills, how to improve these skills, not only in students but also in teachers. This is our main goal this year.
I think that's where, coming back to the earlier conversation about how important context is in terms of thinking about how you implement implications. I think Colombia was the only country that had 2 cities in the final study. And did you have much engagement with Bogota? Because the results are different in quite striking ways in some cases.
Well, it was, we were the only country, and we have a very good relation with the Bogota team. We are doing some comparisons, but it's not so easy because they have some focus. We have another focus on the programs, but we have been having some conversations with them to have more clear comparisons, and we were also asking the OECD if we can have some information of the other cities to see more comparisons, because the only comparison that we have is the one that I show you about the average life satisfaction, and we want to know which were the better countries performing in each of the skills, so that we can learn from the best practices of these other countries.
Great, well, thank you very much. We're almost at the hour. Unfortunately, it is absolutely flown by today. But I just want to thank, Santiago, you and Erin, you very much for the time you took to prepare the presentations, for sharing the findings, for thinking about the specific gender implications, and for making time for this conversation on International Women's Day today. So we appreciate your time and involvement enormously, and good luck with all of the work and the analysis moving forward in your respective cities. As I said at the very beginning, we were lucky to be able to do this event as part of a wider program for Karanga's SEL week. So if you're interested in joining other events in the program, Jennifer has shared the link to the SEL week page on Karanga's site. We have a session coming up tomorrow about teacher well-being, which will connect, I think, with some of what Santiago was talking about and the importance for SEL for teachers. And I'm going to hand back to Jen and just thank you everyone very much for being with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Dominic, I always think it's a good sign when you say, gee, I can't believe we're almost at the hour, and it hadn't even crossed my mind that we were almost at the hour. So Erin and Santiago, you've done an incredible job of, it's really interesting to hear what, not only what your experience was during the assessment, but what your organizations and what your cities and your school districts are actually doing with the information, and that narrative about looking and seeing what we can do with helping students and teachers develop those social emotional skills that are so important. It's been wonderful. Thank you. We're going to end off with just a couple of slides. Just a reminder of some events that we have happening. For those of you that haven't joined us before, in addition to the signature leadership that Knowledge offers for teachers and education leaders, school and district and ministry leaders, we also have something for math leaders. It's a digital math company, and there's all sorts of these kinds of resources. And again, they're completely free of charge. Anyone can jump on, and it's for people that are leading mathematics, but it's also for teachers of mathematics. So lots of resources there, and you're welcome to jump in. We have just posted a really good, and this is a great podcast. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Victoria Shomni, but she is doing really interesting work out of UCL, University College London, and on well-being, on girls and on Black girls. And so in the spirit of gender, thought it would be great to share that, and you can just jump onto any of the places where you usually access podcasts. She's doing really interesting work, and invite you to take a listen there. And finally, our next roundtable will be with a couple of incredible academics. I'm sure many of you have heard of Yong Zhao and Alma Harris. Yong Zhao out of Melbourne and University of Kansas. And Alma used to be at UCL, and she's moved over to Swansea and back home in Wales. And Yong Zhao is going to be talking about a book he co-authored, teaching students how to thrive in a rapidly evolving context. So please jump in and join us. It's certainly an evolving world, and I'm not sure right now if we could ever say that it was evolving in the right direction. So lots of interesting conversations to hear about how we can get things back on track for our students and our populations. So yeah, look forward to that on March the 24th. Please jump in. We will post that very soon. And thanks to all of you. Have a great day. And again, happy International Women's Day. We appreciate all of you. Thanks so much. Take care.